Welcome back to Not Enough Projects. Today we are working on this 1986 Pontiac Fiero with a lot of fun under the trunk here. It is 3.8 liters supercharged Buick V6 swap. So this is a swap that I started from the ground up. We're going to be going through the whole thing, and it's got some running issues that we need to iron out. So at the end of this, we will have this car driving down the road, laying rubber down. Should be a lot of fun. So let's start digging in. Let me walk you guys through everything that I've done on this thing so far. So I'll get more into detail on this when we look at the engine, but when you're swapping these, you got to drop the whole engine cradle from the rear. So while that was out, I went ahead and did polyurethane bushings all the way around. It's got a complete front and rear suspension rebuild. You can see you've got new struts out back, new brakes, a little rusty from sitting, but they're brand new. I also did a full front suspension rebuild. You can see the new shock over there. Obviously polyurethane up front too. You can see the bushing poking through on the control arm. I sanded and wire wheeled and painted all the suspension components, so it looks pretty good in my opinion. I also put on new tires. Obviously these have gotten 0 miles on them basically. Did a easy string alignment just so that it was doable to ride down the road. So let's get into the engine, but before that, let's look at the interior. So really the interior in this thing is not bad. It's complete. See, the door panel is nice. It's a little muddy because I think last time I was working on this, it had rained, so we'll need to clean that up. I got the dash apart because from the factory, the climate control area goes up here, and the radio is a 1.5 DIN that goes down here. And I don't have the stock radio. I had some cheap CD player in here when I bought it, so I took that out, and some guy, I forget who, but you can look it up if you're wanting to do something like this. He designed a 3D printed design models basically that allow you to move the climate control down here and put a double DIN stereo up here. So that's what I'm going to end up doing. Obviously I haven't finished it yet because I was just mocking everything up, and I'd like to get it running and driving down the road before I get too far on doing that. See the gauges up here. I think I got to put a different oil sender on there in order to get that to work, because the Buick one is not the same range as that one. I think it's just a switch actually. But the upholstery on the dash is in pretty good shape. I think there's just one crack over here. Really not bad overall. This is an AC car. Right now I don't have the AC hooked up because I need to make an AC line so that I can run the Buick 3800 AC compressor, but we'll get there. It's a 4-speed manual. Shifting is a little weird right now. It's not bad, but I had to make a relocation bracket. We'll get on that, and I'll show you that later, and it's going to need a little bit of adjusting. I've just kind of got it ballparked right now. It's got power mirrors, no power locks, kind of a weird option, I would say. Usually, or power windows, I mean. Usually the power window switches would be there, but obviously we have manual. So really the only bad part about the interior, and this is really common on Fieros just because of kind of the plasticky 80s GM interior. You can see the center console, the upholstery vinyl is kind of coming off from heat. Here's the, there's no glove box, so here's the document area, I guess you'd call it, and the PCM is behind this. So maybe I will pop it off and show you guys how I have everything wired up, because I did make a wiring harness for this. And the other bad part about the interior is just the seat covers, but luckily the foam is in really great shape. They're still comfortable, so we can get seat covers and reupholster these no problem. So without further ado, let's pop the deck lid, take out the key. I don't have the battery in it right now, so I'm going to need to use the key to open up the deck lid and see what we got in the engine bay. Now, if you're not familiar with Fieros, they're not the most common things, but they are kind of coming back into style. If you're not familiar with Fieros, they are mid-engined. So the engine is back here, and from the factory, originally the first years, I think 84 and 85, you could only get, maybe just 84, you could only get the 4-cylinder 2.5 iron Duke, which is a great motor. although a little bit anemic power-wise. I think it only made 80 horse or something like that. Pretty pathetic, honestly, in something that's meant to be a sports car. But this one was originally a 2.8 V6 car, which has a lot more pep, and it's definitely a lot more drivable. And not that the Iron Duke isn't drivable, but in terms of a sports car, the 2.8 V6 definitely suited it more. If they had started out with the 2.8 V6, I think the Fiero maybe would have had a better reputation from the start. But anyways, a really common swap, which is what I've got going on here, is the 3800 Series 2 supercharged. So these motors came in Buicks from 87 to 2003, I think, somewhere along there. There are a couple of different series of these motors. This is the Series 2, like I said. It's got the Eaton M90 supercharger, I believe, and it is a 3.8 liter V6. These from the factory make, I want to say, 250, 245, something like that horse. So in this Fiero, which weighs just over 2,000 pounds, they're quick with these motors, even stock, and you can do a lot of power upgrades on these things. Now, when I bought this car, it had the 2.8 V6 in here, but the heads were off. I think it had blown a head gasket at some point in its life. The block was total garbage, and actually, I'm remembering now, it actually threw a rod. There's holes in the oil pan. So that was why I pulled the motor out, and that's why it's got this swapped in it. I bought the car for, I think it was $700 or $800. Came with the car, obviously, and it came with this motor, a bunch of PCMs, a couple wiring harnesses that I pieced together, and I made my own wiring harness here. You can see. This is kind of the part that intimidates a lot of people on this swap. You have to take the Buick or Pontiac, depending on what car you're getting the donor motor from. You have to get the harness, the engine harness, from that donor car, and you have to meld it into the Fiero wiring harness. And honestly, it's not a bad job. There's forum members and people in the Fiero community that made really good documentation on how to do the wiring harness. It's a little intimidating, but if you just dive into it and get it and get all the documentation, it's really not that bad. You can see I've still got some tightening up to do on the wiring harness. I just have it to where it's workable right now. A couple of those wires are for the AC, the IAT, things like that I don't have the exact positioning for yet. That's why they're still loose like that. Another one of the big things for the swap that a lot of people get hung up on is the dog bone bracket. Now, obviously, this is a transverse mounted engine for rear wheel drive, so it's the same as a front wheel drive platform. And when the engines torque over, they torque this way, unlike in a longitudinal engine mounted car where they torque this way. So because of that, we have to have this dog bone bracket that keeps the engine from torquing. And honestly, the engine mounting design for the Fieros wasn't ideal. It works, but because of the way it is, you have to have this dog bone bracket. You can add, there's other ways you can get around this dog bone bracket, but what I ended up doing is I actually bought a bracket that had been welded. This is cast iron from a couple different Buick brackets, and the aluminum bracket that was welded on here originally that attached to here broke off. You can see just from torquing the engine over, really. And so I ended up needing to build this one out of steel. It's painted, and see, I only learned to weld just recently, you know, a year ago or whatever, and that's when I built this bracket. And it's not the best. I think I used a flux core. If I did stick, I could get a much better bead on it, but it's solid. It's not, you know, it's not going anywhere. The engine bay is a little dirty because it's been sitting, like I said, for a couple months. I needed to kind of step away from this project for a minute just so I could kind of rethink everything, get my bearings on it. Now, another area of fabrication is the engine mount, which we won't be able to see right now because the front engine mount is on the front of the engine, obviously, but you can't really see it from up top. I did have to fabricate that. I'll probably take a wheel off and show you guys how I did it. I kind of mimicked the West Coast Fiero design, I believe. It's really simple. It's just a couple plates you weld up together. I had to modify it a little bit because I ended up actually snapping it, probably because of the quality of my welds, but I ended up improving a lot, and I reworked it, and that way it's not going anywhere. I put a couple gussets and stuff like that. Now on the 4-speeds, this is another area of fabrication. The 3800 exhaust crossover is in a different location. Well, actually, the stock Fiero motor does not have an exhaust crossover. It does the exhaust routing in a different way. But I wanted to just retain the exhaust crossover for simplicity. I really don't like building exhausts, especially more complicated ones. So what I ended up doing is making a relocation kind of setup for the bracket. And you can see here, this is the first part, and then back here, I still need to paint it because I needed to maybe move some stuff around a little bit to make the shifting a little bit more easy. You can see this cable was moved from here to there, and then this cable was moved from here to there. And that's what this bracket is for. It works as it is, but it needs a little bit of adjustment. Okay, speaking of the exhaust, you do have to build your own custom exhaust, like I did here. I think I have a picture of it just freestanding. I'll try to insert it into the video so you can kind of see how it's oriented. I believe this is a 3-inch exhaust, if I remember right. It's a little bit tight, so you got to do a fair amount of bends and cutting and reworking, stuff like that, but you can get there. I did it myself, or you could just pay an exhaust shop and they'll probably do a way better job for just a little bit more money, but I wanted to do it myself, and I did. You can see how it comes out. I haven't put the hanger on yet, so you can see it's hanging a little lopsided, but we'll get to that. But overall, I'm pretty happy with what it is. And now, unfortunately, since it is a rear, well, mid-engined car, you don't have a lot of length for the exhaust system, so it's really hard to quiet it down. A lot of guys will go with like a Flowmaster muffler, and those, in my opinion, are just so loud. I really don't like loud cars, so I went with this SpinTech muffler. I'm trying to remember the model number. I'll flash it up on the screen, but it's about the biggest muffler you can get that'll fit in here, and it's got the most sound muffling design out of all of them. It's still a little louder than I would like, but what are you gonna do? I might throw maybe some resonator tips or something on there. I don't know how well that would help, but we will see. Okay, another area of the swap that you do have to pay attention to is the water outlet. So this is the stock Fiero water outlet. A lot of guys will chop them and clock them. I didn't. You don't need to, and this is something I didn't really see a lot online. I don't know if I saw anybody who did it like me, probably because it's the wrong way, but it works. It clears everything, you can see. But I just used the stock Fiero water outlet housing. You can see the fittings on the side of the water outlet are clamped shut and brazed shut, just because we don't need them anymore. And you can use the stock Fiero thermostat, but I didn't realize that until it was too late, so I actually cut out, there's a couple tabs that the stock Fiero thermostat slots into, because you actually remove it from the top. So I cut those out, and I'm just using the 3800 thermostat. It is a little bit of a pain to fill up the coolant, but it's really not too big of a deal. You just use a long funnel, stick it in that way, and I didn't want to have to deal with having to cut and re-weld it, but you totally could. I also ended up low mounting the alternator. I built my own relocation bracket for the alternator. I don't know how well you can see it. I'll try to throw up some pictures. I think I've got some pictures of how the brackets work on the alternator. The stock alternator mounting location is up here, and you can do it, but you have to notch the deck lid. I didn't want to deal with it, so I relocated it down. This tensioner may need some reworking eventually. It doesn't quite, well, it's pretty tight, but I would like to maybe get it a little bit tighter. It's a little difficult because you can see, hopefully, the belt almost touches the water pump belt, but it's still good. Now on the 3800 Supercharged Series 2, you have two belts. You have one for the supercharger and one for the accessories. The supercharger belt, I don't think I had to do any modifications on, because it clears everything fine. Now another area that gets attention in the swap is the ignition control module location. I managed to keep it in the stock location, which is right there. A lot of guys will relocate it to the trunk wall over here. I didn't like that idea because you can see it's right above the exhaust manifold, and these things don't like it when they get cooked. You can also, I've also seen guys relocate it to the back wall. I didn't like the idea of doing that because it's so tight back there. I'm sure there's some other areas you could do it, but I fit it back there. I think I had to drill a couple holes in the bracket to mount the ignition control module back just a little bit, but it works out and you can still access all the plug wires. So I actually like this location. Alright, so the fuel system. Obviously the supercharged V6 draws way more than the V6 that originally was in here, fuel wise. So you have to upgrade the fuel pump. I believe I went with the EP 381. It's been a while. I'll flash the part number up on the screen if I'm off. But obviously you have to drop the tank to replace the fuel pump, and my tank, like a lot of other Fiero tanks, had a little bit of rust in it. The Fiero tanks are pretty notorious for rusting out, and mine was really solid. There was just a little bit of surface rust basically that would break off and plug up filters and stuff. So I went ahead and used vinegar, etched it all out. Took a couple days, but it's good now. Also the fuel sender wasn't working right, so after a lot of sanding and vinegar soaking and all that, I got it to work again, and it should work reliably. Hopefully we don't have to drop the tank and replace it because they're not super easy to find. I think that just about covers the broad strokes of the swap and everything I've done to this point. There are a few things that I need to finish up before I can call this really swapped. Like I said earlier, the shifter linkage needs a little bit of adjustment. Obviously the intake is missing. I think I'm going to try to retain the stock airbox, which goes here, and then there's the intake vent on the side of the car, which I think is pretty cool. A lot of guys will just go with a cold air intake that goes down to the fender well, but I'd like to retain the stock appearance on that. There's also just a little bit of tightening up for the wiring harness I need to do, and also I'd like to get the AC operational. Right now I've got a bypass bracket in place, which works. Obviously the AC doesn't work, so that will be a project for another day. I did go through on the motor while it was out on the engine cradle before I put it in, and I did intake gaskets because the stock lower intake manifold gaskets are known for failing. It'll leak coolant into the crankcase, and obviously that's no bueno. I also did valve cover gaskets and a supercharger gasket. The EGR is bypassed right now because the stock pipe had a crack in it, so I just made a little block-off plate for both this side and the engine side. So I don't know if we'll end up fixing that, but for now it's still here in place. Oh right, the clutch, that's another big part of the swap, because obviously the stock style clutch is not going to handle the torque that the supercharged motor puts out. So I have a spec 3+, stage 3+ clutch and pressure plate, I believe, and also the flywheel. When you do a manual, you have to mill them down because the 3800 supercharged never actually came in a manual car. So you get an NA 3800 flywheel from a Camaro, I believe. You have it milled down. I forget the exact amount. This is all on a forum, all in forum posts. This is a very common swap. There's tons of info. And then you have to get it balanced to the 3800 supercharged balance. So I was able to score one. I think it was a West Coast Fiero one. I scored it used. I mean, it had never been installed, but somebody had bought it and never used it. I got a pretty good deal on it. So I think that just about covers everything on the swap I've done this to this point. Hopefully this isn't getting too long and rambly and boring, but I'll kind of give the backstory now of why it is not quite on the road yet. So obviously this motor, I got it in unknown condition. I did do a compression test. All the cylinders were dead even. I believe they were all almost exactly 150 psi, which is great. They're all even. So this seemed like a good healthy motor. After installing it, there were a few dead injectors I had to replace. It was surging really bad. I tracked down a couple vacuum leaks. Like I said, there was one in that EGR tube, and I think there were a couple other places I found. It still is not running quite right. It'll die when you clutch in sometimes. Also, I think, if I remember right, it still will do a little bit of a surge at some points. So I kind of just put this to the side because I needed to devote a lot of energy and time into this thing to figure it out, so I had to go work on some other projects, but now we are back on this. I think also I was having problems of it going like pig dead rich, like dead rich, smoking rich, and the O2 sensor had failed in a weird way. It wasn't reporting a failure, but it was commanding the engine to just keep dumping fuel in there. It was not good. So I replaced the O2 sensor, and I think, if I remember right, that helped a lot. I kind of remember it, after I had done all this work on it, going a little lean and maybe popping on harder throttle opening. So that would suggest to me fuel starvation. I don't know if the injectors are bad. Like I said, I had to replace a couple, so those are suspect in my mind. Also, I'm just noticing these are no good now. I'm gonna have to replace those. They were good when I was working on it, but these rubber caps are pretty much trash. The silicone ones are what you want to get. So I'll replace those before we get too far. Let's see, was there anything else? Don't think so. One thing I have been happy with, this thing has not leaked basically a drop while it's sat, so that's really awesome. I'm going to check the oil obviously before we get too far. It's kind of annoying. You can see the dipstick's way back over there, so that's a pain in the butt. And also check the coolant. Well, we can check at the rad, which actually, let me show you guys that. So if you're not familiar with the Fiero, here's a little peek into the front hood area on a normal car. You got your spare tire. This one's original. It's in pretty good shape. I think it's even got a decent amount of air in it. So you've got our jack, washer reservoir, master cylinders for the brakes and clutch, headlights, which actually the headlights motors on this one work well. That's kind of rare. Not rare, but these are points of failure. They fail very easily. I don't know if I've given you guys a shot of the front end yet. There you go. See, it's not the best looker right now. I would like to do a paint job on this at some point. See, it's a sunroof car. I got it open because it's a little hot in there. So let's check. Cool. Might need two hands on this one. You can see our expansion tank still has coolant in it. I'm not that worried. It hasn't made any puddles. So here's the AC stuff. Yeah, and this car is just super clean, rust-wise, and just completeness-wise. The Fieros are really well known for rusting out. They're kind of built like an econo car, really, to be honest with you. And a big place of where they'll rot out is down here in the trunk area. This thing is solid. I mean, there's paint on every surface. The only speck of rust on this thing is the battery box from a leaking battery. There is no rust anywhere else, so I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, this thing is in great shape for what it is. It does have the classic taillight crack, but overall it's not in the worst of shape. I do have the sail panel glass, and also these slots go right there. The glass is in good shape, just needs the Pontiac emblems. I just need to get the sticky foam. That's why they're not on there right now. You can see I've got some miscellaneous junk in here. I swapped out plug wires and stuff, so that's still in there. This is just the IAT and the little, I think I was using that piece of foam just as a little bit of a filter. But before we dig into this too far, let's vacuum out all this tree dropping crap and, well, get a battery in here and figure out what we're working with. But I mentioned it before, the reason I've got this is just a fuel pressure sensor, which actually is still holding pressure, so that's a good sign after sitting so long. I was just suspect of whether we were actually getting the proper pressure while running, so that's why I have that hooked up. Let's go grab the battery. So this is actually the battery that came with the car. It kind of works. I've revived it a little bit. It self-discharges after a while, but I figure we can just use this until it's actually on the road, because I mean it starts it just fine, not a big deal. So let's see. There's a little bit of a pain to get in here. I do know a lot of guys will relocate the battery up to the front when they're doing this motor swap. I'd rather keep it back here personally, but pros and cons to each way. Headlights are on for some reason. I'm gonna go turn this off. Got power. Guess we'll look at the key. I don't hear the fuel pump kicking on. Check engine light is on, so that's good. Got the PCM getting power. The way I have, oh man, I forgot how annoying the dinger is on this thing. Okay, the way I have the fuel pump relay set up does need some addressing at some point. I've got a weather pack connector, but I just have a standard relay on it, so I need to get an actual good relay. But this works for now. There might be a little bit of corrosion on it. Okay, let's see if anything happens there. And I did do the hot wire fuel pump mod, I think it's called, if I remember right. Because originally the fuel pump power wire goes from the battery, it runs through the firewall, into a connector, out the other side, back out of here, into the fuel pump. So I bypassed that, since this fuel pump draws a fair amount more current than the original. I bypassed that, so it goes straight from the battery to the fuel pump through that relay. Through a fuse, obviously, but it's not turning over because I got the clutch not engaged. Yeah, so no fuel pump, it doesn't seem. Okay, let's get the test light and see if we're getting power to the fuel pump engage wire. It's kind of dim, but we have power to the relay. This green-white wire, that is the fuel pump engage, I believe. And then this orange. Well, let's just pop the relay out and see what we got here. Make sure we got a good ground. Put this to positive. Okay, so I forget whether the computer grounds a wire or energizes. So let's leave it here. Try to stick this in so that I can see it from the window. Hopefully I can see that. Alright. And hopefully you guys can see it. Okay, I'm gonna go turn the key on and we'll see if that LED lights up. Definitely lit up. So it does energize the fuel pump engage wire. Then this one is grounded, so that's right. So let's try seeing if the relay clicks. Okay, the relay is not clicking from what I can feel. So let's take it to a battery and test it. Alright, here's a battery. Got a set of jumper cables here. Forget exactly which wires. Relay's clicking. Okay. Sounds like I left the key on. But so what it seemed like to me is we have an issue with the connection between this and that connector. Let me make sure I've got it in the right way. Okay, let's try this. I'm going to clip on to the ground here. Put it in the same place. Alright, I clipped on to where the spade connector grounds to the body on that wire. So I'm going to turn the ignition on and see if this lights up like it did before. Yep, it lit up. Okay. Okay, with the relay in there, I'll try back probing, I think. I do kind of remember having this problem before. Let's try just jumpering it for now. If that works, we can come back and address this. Yep, I hear it running. Watch the fuel pressure gauge. This is interesting. See it drop like that? It should hold steady. Wonder if it's got a leaky injector or stuck injector. I don't recall it being like that before, but let's hot wire the pump, see if we can get it started up, and we'll go from there. Okay, I'm gonna go start it up. Bring you guys back a little bit. Settled out there. I think I just went into closed loop probably. Fuel pressure is oh, right. There's our issue. I totally forgot about that. That knocking you hear, I think, is the blower. So, okay, there we go. Settled down a little bit. Fuel pressure, maybe. Well, I don't know. It settled out. I need to get a new cap over here, obviously. Started right back up though, so that's good. I think I'm gonna shut it down and go grab a new cap for it. Yeah, idled down to just under 1,000. Voltage seems a little high, that's weird. So we'll have to look at that. It is a computer controlled, no, I think it's just a standard alternator, so we'll have to see on that, but let's get it running nice first. So I'm gonna go get a cap for that. Alright, I got a new caps on. This one's a little small, so I had to squeeze it on there. That's probably why the other one failed, but it works for now. I can get a proper one later, but fuel pressure dropped back down to just above 30. That is a little suspect. I guess that would have to do with our fuel pressure regulator, probably, since it only drops down to 30. I would imagine if we had a leaking injector that it would probably bleed down to basically 0. But given that it's only bleeding down to here, that maybe leads me to believe we have a regulator issue. I don't know. It could be maybe an injector that only leaks at higher pressure, I suppose. But we will need to do some investigation on that. Let's fire it back up as it is and see how we're doing. In a minute, and you can actually see it's still bleeding down. Just slower, obviously, because the pressure's lower. So that's kind of leading me to believe that's part of our issue. But again, let's just re-hot wire the pump and I'll fire it up and we'll see what happens. Take 2. I'm gonna pull up the OBD2 scanner and see what our fuel trims are like. If it's showing real rich, I mean, that would lead me to believe leaking stuck injectors, so I'm gonna do that. I can't film while I'm doing that because it's also on my phone, so I'll let you guys know what it says. Alright, so I left the scanner in a car that's not here, so I'll have to revisit that. Sorry, that's the brake dinger, it's really annoying. But I mean, it really is running pretty good at the moment, and I remember it was running about this good when I stopped. The main problem was it would go what seemed to me like lean under hard acceleration, and it would also die with when you clutch in a lot of times, and you'd have to restart it. And I'm seeing this it looks like overcharging, so I don't know. I've charged the battery on a battery charger before, so I'm not sure what's up there. We'll have to see. Obviously the oil pressure is not reading right because I got the wrong sender in there, but not a huge deal. can see it returns back to idle a little slow, but it doesn't go into surging. And before, the main problem, before I got it to this point, is that it would just surge really bad, like almost to dying to 2500, almost to dying to 2500, just like that over and over, and it would just get worse and worse. And I've got it sorted now, and I think the O2 sensor, which, I mean, usually O2 sensors don't fail like that. They usually fail like the heater circuit fails or something like that, but it failed weird, and it was reading way rich, which I've never seen before. Maybe that's common, but I don't encounter that very often, and almost always it's not the O2 sensor, but I guess in this case it was. So yeah, I think the dropping fuel pressure is what we're gonna need to kind of track down at this point. So I'll wait till we get the OBD2 scanner and we'll go from there. Okay, you know what, before we get too far down the rabbit hole of chasing fuel trims and that kind of thing, because I kind of remember them getting them to the point where they were normal after, you know, changing the O2 sensor and tightening up a couple other things. Let's do a little bit of a simple test to try to pinpoint where our fuel is leaking. And you can see it leaked down to under 10 psi, so, which is weird because when it sat, I mean, it sat for over a month or two, leaked down to only 20. So anyways, we're gonna just clamp off the return fuel line, run the pump, and see if maybe if the fuel regulator is leaking, or if it still leaks down into either the fuel injectors, or I believe fuel pumps have a one-way valve in them in the tank, and that possibly failed, but it's a brand new pump. But I mean, just because it's a new part doesn't mean it's a good part. So, oops, still leaking down. Pretty rapidly. Let me make sure I've got those tight. Okay, I tightened the vice grip up a little bit. Let's cycle the pump on again. Oh yeah, I didn't have it clamped all the way. Now you can see it popped up to over 70 because the return is clamped off, and what the return does is it returns the excess fuel that isn't needed to maintain pressure back into the tank, and that's done by the fuel regulator. And you can see there's a hose on the fuel regulator. It's a vacuum hose, and it goes to manifold vacuum because if you think about it, the fuel pressure has to be referenced to the engine vacuum or boost, depending if it's a boosted motor, because under more vacuum you need less fuel pressure because the engine is trying to suck air into it. Now under boost you need more air pressure because the engine is resisting anything being forced into it, if that makes sense. Now we are leaking down slowly, although it seems to be leaking much slower than it was with the return line unclamped. So if I unclamp the return line, it should drop down to, what is it, 42 or whatever. It overshot a little bit because there's not a fuel pump running, but let's clamp it again. It is leaking. Let's see if it starts leaking faster. If I unclamp it, it's unclamped. About the same. Okay, so now I'm going to try clamping the feed line. And then we'll run the pump again. Might not have gotten a very good clamp because it should have shot up to 70 like we saw before. Okay, well it's still leaking down. I mean, I've got this fuel line clamped hard. Oh. Oh my gosh. I can't believe I did that. You guys are probably yelling at me. Obviously we have the fuel pressure gauge at the fuel rail. If we clamp off the supply line, we're not going to get pressure to the fuel rail. And obviously there's just a little bit sneaking past, able to get it up there. So what we're gonna have to do, actually, I know this, I don't know why I didn't do this. We're gonna have to pull the line off, and we'll put the fuel gauge into the line, and then we can see what kind of pressure we're holding after bypassing the fuel rail. Okay, I clamped the return line a little bit harder, and it's held 68 psi for, I don't know, 5 minutes plus. So I don't think we have any leaking injectors, because if they were leaking down that quickly at 42 psi or whatever, they would be leaking down pretty dang quick at 68, which they aren't. So our leak is just the fuel pressure regulator returning the fuel back to the tank. Now, we don't really have any long crank issues or anything like that, and I don't think, you know, just trying to logic through it, I don't think that a leaking fuel pressure regulator would cause the symptoms I'm seeing, which I guess you guys haven't seen yet, because I gotta take this out on the road and show you guys. So I think that was just a little bit of a red herring. I don't think that's something that is causing our issue. I guess I should probably take this out and let me show you guys exactly what we're dealing with. Okay, so you can see we're warming up, we're at 120, we should be in closed loop. Where are you at? There we go. Closed loop, yep. You can see our fuel trims are a little wacky. They're adding a lot of fuel, but long term's a little high. But let's just take it out and see how it does. It's been a couple months, so this will be interesting. Man, this car is low. See it. Bucks a little bit. What's the voltage at? Because we did notice the look at that. It goes up and down with the blinker. May have some. Oh no, voltage isn't bad. Looks like the gauge might just be a little wacky. You can see it breaks up a little bit. It's like we're losing spark intermittently or something. Alignment needs some work. Wanders just a little bit. But let's see if it dies. We'll pop in this little turn off. We didn't die. Fuel trims look like they've calmed down a little bit at idle. So I don't know what exactly it was doing. Although we're not up to temp. Yeah, there you go. So sitting. Well, let's go back out. Second's a little weird to get into. All the other gears are not bad though. Yeah, you guys can't feel it obviously because you're not here, but it breaks up just a little bit and it jerks just slightly under throttle. Let's see if we can get it to die. So clutch in. Yep, engine died. Oh wait, oh, pop back up. But yeah, it's surging, clutch in. Surprised it used to die right when you clutch in, but actually it settled out pretty steady. Sorry. Alright, so I'm starting to suspect that we've got fuel restriction somewhere, because that's kind of what the symptoms are seeming like to me. So first things first, we're going to check out the fuel filter, because I have not changed it. I've got a new one. We'll see if the old one's clogged. Not super happy with how I have the fuel set up, especially since it's high pressure with the fuel injection, but I'll have to address it later. First, just want to get on the road. So you can see we've got I just cut off the hard line so that I could put a fuel injection hose on there. I did put like a bubble bar or a bubble flare in there to keep the hose from slipping off, and I'm using fuel injection hose clamps, so I'm not too worried about it, but it's something that'd be good to address down the road. So it's pretty simple. Let's take the bracket off, holding it on, and get the lines off. Oh, that's interesting. The fitting is loose. It's still holding a little bit of pressure. So if you know anything about Fieros, you know they have a tendency to rot out pretty bad. They were built as Econo cars, unfortunately, but that's what the GM bean counters wanted. So anyways, they rot out like crazy. This one has not a speck of rust on it. It is just in super solid condition. So I'm pretty happy about that. The tank's not even rotted out. I did drop it to clean it when I did the swap. Hopefully that doesn't siphon out. But the tank was a little rusty, needed cleaned out, definitely. But there's no holes or anything, so that's super awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can get a plug or something for that, because it's gonna want to siphon. Ooh, yeah, that is plugged. Found a problem. It's like I'm blowing through nothing on that one. Give those a tight one down here. Man, I should put gloves on. It melted some undercoating and sludge. Anyways, I don't know. It doesn't really show on that. Let me see if we can find a good background. Well, it doesn't show very well, but the gas coming out of this filter is rust colored, so yeah. I'm hoping that was all caused before I, there you go, here's a, I was hoping that that's all caused by, the tank before I cleaned it, hopefully, I don't know, oh yeah, there you go, but you saw me blow through there, hopefully, but it is hard to blow through. You see, that was causing it, so, yeah, the new one, it's like blowing through nothing, so this is definitely an issue, if not the issue. I'm glad we got that, so I guess let's see how it runs now. Alright, I pulled it up and it's running great. No surgeon or anything. All the computer data looks good, fuel trims are fine. So I think we'll do a pull up the driveway. Before, when I would do a pull up the driveway in first or second, it would just pop and sputter, like almost like it wasn't getting fuel. Who would have guessed? So we'll give her some beans up the driveway, and that'll give us a good indication of what's going on. I'm gonna wash the windshield because it's pretty bad. Did put new blades on this, so I don't know if they're any good, because I put them on a year ago or whatever. Yeah, not bad. Here we go. Seemed to do fine, so I guess I'll take her on the road just a little bit. I will let you guys know if anything happens, because well, I'll try setting the camera up here. I just do not like holding the phone and doing stuff. Yeah, I'll just bring you guys back if anything happens. If not, then I'll try to get back with, have somebody in passenger seat that can film for me, and you know, go from there. In fifth gear. And if I give her just you know, more than a quarter throttle input, she bucks. So that kind of seems like fuel issue to me. We'll see. What's this? Clutch in? No, it's not doing it. If I'm at speed, if I clutch in while I'm driving, it dies. So you got to clutch back out to get it to start back up. So something else to track down on that. Okay, so I think I found out why we're dying at speed when we clutch in. Don't mind this rat's nest, it still needs cleaned up. This is the harness that I made. Obviously everything needs shortened. I just wanted to make sure everything worked before I went through the labor of shortening everything and taping it up and making it look nice. So, and if you're not familiar, this is where the stock computer sits. The center console is here, and you can see I've got it popped out. And the computer just sits behind this compartment. And with the 3800 PCM, it's actually still fits fine, so that's nice. Get that out of the way. Okay, so I think our problem is, and this is funny because I just had the same exact problem on our 89 Chrysler LeBaron. Check out the revival videos on that if you haven't seen them. Turned out to be a pretty fun car, even though it's, you know, a little bit lazy, but it turns out it's not actually. So anyways, the problem is that the speed sensor, although I have it hooked up so the speedo works, the PCM is not getting a speed sensor signal. I did all this a number of months ago, so everything's kind of fuzzy in my mind, but I did not hook up the speed sensor to the PCM. I only hooked up the speed sensor to the dash. So the speedo works, but the PCM does not know what the vehicle speed is. Now, probably the reason why I didn't do that is because I figured it's a manual, so it doesn't need to know the speed, but that actually is wrong, because it needs to know the speed, because if it tries to idle down to a stopped idle speed when you're moving, it's going to die, especially when you're engine braking and you let off the clutch, which is what was happening. I bet you if I let off the clutch while I had a little bit of throttle input, it probably would not have died. So anyways, all that to say, we need to hook up the speedo, or the speed sensor signal to the PCM. It's this purple wire and this yellow wire. And you can see it just comes directly off the harness. Well, maybe you can't see through the rat's nest, but it comes directly off the harness right into the, if I remember right, this is the C500 connector. Could be wrong. This is either the C500 or the C203, if I remember right. So the only problem is the stock speed sensor from the Buicks. I believe the engine and PCM I have came from a 98 Regal or something like that. It uses a different type of speed sensor, and it sends a different amount of pulses for every revolution, which is how the speed sensor works. The Fiero works different than the PCM did. Now, you can program it out, and when I bought this car, it came with the engine, a bunch of PCMs. This is the only one that's programmed for the manual, and a bunch of wiring harnesses, and I had to, you know, slash and dice to get everything to work, and I had to sort through all that to get it to work. But anyways, the 3800 supercharged never came in a manual car, so you take an automatic PCM and you program all the automatic stuff out, like the codes and all that, because if it doesn't have all the sensors from the automatic transmission, it puts it in limp mode and it doesn't run right. Also, you have to program the anti-theft out. This, obviously, I did not program myself. It came with the car, so I don't know what exactly has been programmed out on it. It is really common to program these to work with the Fiero speed sensor, but I don't know if that's been done, so I think what we're going to do is just hook up the speed sensor signal, directly to the PCM, and then we'll see if the OBD2 reading of the speed is accurate. If it is accurate, then we'll know it's been programmed for, I think it's a 4,000 pulse per minute or something like that speedo that the Fiero has, speed sensor rather. And if it's totally wrong, there is an adapter circuit you can build. It's just a simple, I think it's a diode, a couple resistors, and a capacitor. So we'll do that if we need to, but we're going to start simple and just hook it up directly to the speed sensor. Alright, so if you look here, and if you're doing your own swap on a Fiero, or you're thinking about it, highly recommend you find this chart. I think it's from Sinister Performance. I don't know, you'll find it on the Fiero forum if you just look up 3800 swap. There's so much information. So you can see pins 64 and 65 on the blue connector are the vehicle speed sensor input for the PCM. You can see it's blue, it says blue. So we're looking at 64 and 65. And this wiring chart gives you that yellow should be 64, purple should be 65. So I've got a couple of pre-terminated yellow and purple PCM wiring harness wires. So we're just going to put those in and then splice the ends into these wires. I'll bring you guys back once it's done. Alright, we're soldered and heat shrinked. I still need to shrink it, but I'm going to do that once we verify everything actually works. So we've got the PCM connectors coming off, and we'll just need to remove this blue shield so that we can get to the pins, and then we're just going to shove them down in. there is like a rubber seal that it has to go through, and then it's got little plastic tabs that clip onto this. So it just snaps in. We may not even need to remove the blue part. We'll see. All right, there we go. You do have to take off the blue shield because it keeps these pins I was talking about, the clips, from coming up all the way and letting the pins all the way down. But you can see they're fully seated. 64 and 65. Now we just shove this rat's nest back on and tighten down the connector bolt. Alright, so we're running right now. I drove up and down the driveway and the PCM is seeing a mile per hour signal. I don't think it's the correct signal, but I think it'll be fine because basically the PCM needs to know if it's moving or not. When I was backing down the driveway, I don't know, I'm guessing I was going 5 or 7 miles an hour or something around there. It said 3, so it's about half, which should be fine, I think. Let's give it a road test, I guess, and see how it does. Alright, moment of truth, we're in 4th gear, going 45. Before, when I'd clutch in, it dies, so let's see. Nope, she's holding idle, so I think that was the issue. I'm gonna flip around, do a couple more goes, and we'll see. She is still bucking under load, so we've got some kind of fuel issue, I'm guessing. I think it's still dying. Let's see when I clutch in here. Yep. So actually it looks like the speed's dead on, but yeah, it still dies. So we're gonna start needing to look elsewhere. I'm guessing that the bucking, or I don't know if it's ignition loss or if it's a lean condition while we're, you know, getting into her more than, I don't know, a quarter throttle. But I'm guessing that's probably related to the dying when you clutch in. Maybe not. If I remember right, this does have a new idle air control valve, which is one thing that'd be suspect. If it's getting hung up and it can't move quick enough to let the necessary amount of idle air in when you clutch in, that could be an issue. It is kind of weird that it only happens in 4th and 3rd gear pretty much when you clutch in and you're moving at speed. So that's kind of weird, but I don't know, I'll have to do some thinking. Alright, so it's been an embarrassingly long time since I even looked at this thing. You know, other paid projects and other things that are more important take precedent over this. But we're back on it, and I'm hoping this will be the final push. I think last time we found some potential fuel-related issues. If I remember right, the original problem we're having with this engine were crazy rich fuel trims. I think we got those all worked out, but if I remember right, the problem we're having is you give this thing any load and it starts bucking and misfiring and doing all kinds of stuff. So to me, that seems very much like an ignition issue, which I think these things are kind of known for, with the ignition control modules and the wiring for those. So I actually, let me bring you in here. So I actually picked up a junkyard unit with the coils and the ignition module. Everything is filthy in here. Need to go spray it all out. So I figured I'd switch that on real quick because it's cheap and I know it's a good module because it was from a wrecked car. So let's fire it up and I guess see what it does. There was one wire on that harness, the white wire, which I believe is the main signal. I'm trying to remember which one it was, but that had come out a little bit out of the connector, so possibly that's related. But we will see. So let me pop the garage open a little bit here and fire up. If I remember right, the exhaust on this thing is very loud, unfortunately. I'm not a loud exhaust guy, but we have it pointed in the garage, so it's going to reverberate, of course. Alrighty, here we go. Got the scan tool connected here, but one thing that is a little bit weird is how high it seems to be charging. That could definitely affect some electronic related things. Let's see what the ECU sees for voltage. Or I think, doesn't the dongle thing read? Let's find out. 14.4. It's the battery's a little low, so that's fine. I don't know why that's reading so crazy high. Seemed to be running really good. I remember for a while we were having like weird surging, bucking issue, or weird surging issues at idle. I think we got that all squared away. Oh man, freaking took the brake off. Jeez. Yeah, 13.9, yeah, we're fine on voltage. I don't know, that gauge needs some attention, but yeah, look, I mean, it's running smooth. Does smell a little rich, but it's not in closed loop yet, and we don't have cat, so still gotta figure out an air filter setup. Good oil pressure. That's because the I may have explained this before, but the 3800 has a switch where the original one had a sender, so that's why it's reading like that. Let's see how our clutch works. Man, everything, I have not driven this car hardly at all. All the pedals are shifted over, which is funny. Yeah, goes into gear just fine. We do have a little bit of adjustment we need to do to the homebrew linkage setup we got going on. Clutch releases and goes just fine. Reverse, no problem. Engine doesn't die. Half tank of fuel. Which, another thing, I don't remember if I mentioned this, the fuel tank, I went completely through it, so it's in good shape. It was a little rusty, but nothing crazy. And if I remember right, temp gauge did work. Speedo gauge should work. RPM gauge, tach, also works. Make sure it idles back down. Yeah. Let's see if it goes in a closed loop. Let's see. It says 47 degrees C. What is that? 130 or so degrees Fahrenheit, or freedom units. Apparently we have low oil. I don't remember if this thing has an oil level sensor or not. Closed loop. I don't know why the fuel trims aren't there. We're idling down just fine. There we go. That's probably desired fuel air fuel ratio. Yeah, so it's switching. Our O2 sensor switching. That is a pretty big long-term fuel trim, but potentially not a big deal, especially since we have switchage on our O2 sensor, which means we're floating around stoichiometric. Graph that. Yeah. So that means the control system's working right. It's bringing it around on that equilibrium, which is where you want to be at idle. Okay, maybe it's time to pull this out, get it back on the road, and shake it down again. We'll see if the ignition module did anything. I hate to throw parts at it, but this thing is kind of annoying to diagnose because everything's squeezed in the engine bay, and it's a junkyard part, so it was like, you know, 20 bucks or something. So I'll load the parts cannon with 20 bucks, no big deal. Alright, so let's hop out on the road, I guess, and see how it does. Like it might need an alignment. I think I did all the suspension and stuff. So. Ooh. It doesn't like second up here. Module. Oh man. Okay, we're in 4th gear. We'll get mildly below the speed limit just in case. Yeah, pulls pretty solid. I'm not gonna push it too much more, but I guess let's take it to the gas station, get some fresh gas in it, because this is antique gas at this point. Yeah, I gotta fix the shifter. Maybe a skip second kind of deal for now. We'll open her up a little bit up this road. You get in some real trouble. I didn't realize how fast it would run out of first. That's what happened is it hit the rev limiter. We hit 6 grand like that. So, and we don't have second really. I was skipping it, so. I mean, even in fourth, it pulls pretty decent. I'm happy. And once we get a proper second gear, she'll rip. Alright, well, I'm thrilled. Embarrassingly, that's been like 3 years in the making, I think. And it sat for most of that because I just got busy with other stuff. When all we need to do is just switch the ignition module out and now it's good to go. So that was a huge achievement on this thing. Getting it actually fully drivable on the road has been a long time coming. There's more to come on this thing. We need to re-engineer some of the interesting brackets and stuff I made for the accessory belt. I kind of just did ultra low buck and made what I had work, but I think we can improve it and make it so that we don't have belt squeal or there's like a chirping pulley right now. So more to come on this. We gotta tie up all of the wire harness stuff. We gotta do the interior. We gotta make an air intake. So all that stuff will be coming, but we made huge progress this time. Thanks for tagging along, and I will see you next time.